in worship. So really, she's really asking two questions. She's basically saying, the Samaritans are hated and women have no voice. So where should I worship? Go back to what she says. She says, who are you, a Jew, speaking to me, a woman? Women generally don't have a voice in my culture, and Samaritans are outcasts. So understand this. This is what the Lord told me. He said racism and sexism both are hindrances to true worship and citywide transformation. Racism and sexism are both hindrances to true worship and citywide transformation. She goes on and then she changes the subject and she says, well, listen, this is our father Jacob's well. Because remember, Jesus is getting to the root of what her issues are. So now she tries to change the subject. And what does she do? She tries to change the subject to her ancestry and her tradition. She starts talking about this well. This well is deep. And according to historical context, this well was deep and it was wide. It was 9 feet wide, 150 feet deep, with 15 feet of water in it. This well was her tie to her people, to her heritage, to her class, to her ancestry. It was the well of the patriarch. Well, why is that important? Well, even today, you have to think about the fact that if she was hated as a Samaritan, then her only tie to pride came through her culture. So she knew a lot about this well. This is a people, think about it, the Samaritans are a people who are hanging on to their identity by Jacob. They are hated, and being culturally hated makes you take pride and seek affirmation in your ancestry like nothing else can. So Jesus wants to give her not just the water that's been sitting there, but Jesus says, I want to give to you living and eternal water. We know water is life, right? Even now, you have water systems that are being threatened because, right, no water, blocked water equals no life. And so she comes back to Jesus and she says, Jesus, you have no tools. Jesus, you have no tools. The well is deep. But what she's really asking, if you look at her question, she's really asking, Jesus, are you the greatest? Are you the greatest of all time? Are you greater than Jacob who built this well? Because you're offering me water, Jesus. But I already have a well. I'm good. I already have a tradition that I dig from. I'm good. Right? So she's saying, are you greater than Jacob who built this well? Who drank from it? Who left a legacy for his children's children? What is she asking? She's saying, this well, Jesus, was built to last. It's still here. Are you a greater builder than what Jacob has built? This well is giving us life generations later. Are you a greater supplier, Jesus? This is the well and the resource that my ancestor left. Are you giving me a greater heritage, Jesus? I want to know, because you're asking me to get water from you, and I don't see anything that you have to get this water from. What I see in front of me, what I see is this well. It represents my traditions. It represents my ancestry. It represents all of the generations and the legacy that's tied to it. She's in essence saying, this is generational. This is what I know. Can you promise to be greater than what I already have? I came to draw water, but you're offering me eternal life, and you're offering me living water, but I don't see this water. I don't know where it came from. I don't know where you're going to get it from. Does your offer, Jesus, have a greater lifespan? Can what you offer me outlast what I already have? Will what you give me fizzle out or grow stale? But Jesus says this, and I really do want you to look at this well as the traditions of men, because that is what she's talking about. She's talking about her ties to Jacob and this well. And Jesus says this, you drink this water from Jacob's well, from the well of your ancestor. If you drink from this, you are going to thirst again. If you drink from the well of your tradition, you are going to thirst again. Because why? Traditions always leave you thirsty and thirsting for more. Traditions always leave you thirsty and thirsting for more. But Jesus says the water that I give will be an eternal, internal fountain springing up. It will not be stale. It will always be flowing. There will be perpetual refreshing. There will be perpetual life. There will be perpetual cleansing happening on the inside of you. Ongoing, non-stop. So she had a thirst issue. And her problem could not be worked out. Her problem could not be worked out in the flesh. It could not be worked out on her flesh. And it could not be worked out with the flesh of other men. I'll say it again. Her problem could not be worked out in the flesh. Her problem could not be worked out on her flesh. And her problem could not be worked out with the flesh of other men. Jesus had to get to the root of her troubles. Remember, it is high noon, and the young men who wished to marry went to the wells where the women drew water. And so they were either looking for single women, or they were either looking for single women who didn't want to be married. So they knew, if you want to find a woman, go to the well. If you want to find a man who's looking for a woman, go to the well. This was a hookup spot for legitimate and down low encounters. Maidens generally did not show up at the well at high noon. And they did not come alone. So we know when she gets there, right? Let's see what happens. Let's go to verse 16. Jesus saith unto her, go call thy husband and come hither. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said unto her, thou hast well said, I have no husband. For thou hast had 5 husbands. And he whom thou now hast is not thy husband. In that you told the truth. But what does she do? Rather than have Jesus expose more of her life, she changes the subject. Verse 19. Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshiped in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Jesus saith unto her, woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. For ye worship, ye know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour cometh and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Now listen. This woman had 5 husbands. Her love life is in progress. Her romantic life is in progress. Now, there is no evidential text that can suggest that she was a prostitute. She could have been widowed 5 times, or she could have been properly divorced 5 times. So we don't want to put something on her character that's not in the text. But what we do know is clearly she is dissatisfied because she's on man number 6. And she's at the well. But she's encountering the 7th man. The man who makes things complete in his name is Jesus. So she tells Jesus, you know what? We don't have any dealings with the Jews. And that word dealings there is a Greek word that actually means familiar intercourse or hospitality. So she basically is telling Jesus outright, we only do ordinary buying and selling. We don't do pleasure and business. We don't mix business and pleasure with the Jews. We don't do that. We don't get down like that. But God had something in mind. She may have been looking for the hookup, but the bridegroom was waiting on her. So what does she do? She quickly changes the subject, lest Jesus expose more of her life. And she does what a lot of people do, especially a lot of churchy people. She changes the subject. She talks about what she knows, and she shifts to what I call religious jargon in an effort to kind of move Jesus along. Okay, Jesus, you're getting in my business now. You're starting to get into my personal life. So let me give you some religious jargon and let me talk a little bit of church with you, because I'm not interested in you digging deeper. So she brings up the divided doctrine of her day. And as we get into this, I want you to pay attention, because as I was reading this, I felt like I was in 2016. She begins to dig into the divided doctrines of her day. And she begins to tell Jesus that, listen, Jesus, there are 2 rival temples. There are 2 rival temples. I have no church home. Where do I go to worship? I mean, I know the Messiah is coming, but where do I go to worship? Church has me confused, but I am looking for the Messiah. So where do I go? They're telling me, you know, my people, that we worship here at Mount Gerizim, which actually means Mount of Blessing. But you all are told to worship in Jerusalem. So where do I worship? Where do I go to church? But Jesus understood this confusion, because remember, there were 2 high priests at the time. There was lots of division going on, and the religious leaders were trying to pit Jesus against other leaders of the day. But get this, a little bit of background here. How did the Samaritans come to worship and have a different place that they were worshiping in? In 332 BC, the governor of Samaria, and you're going to find this name familiar, Sanballat, the opposer of Nehemiah, decided of his own accord to get allegiance from Alexander the Great, and he got permission to build a rival temple to rival the worship that was already going on in Jerusalem. He built this temple for his son, Manasseh, his son-in-law, and made his son-in-law priest of the temple. So, when she talks about, I don't know where to worship, she's actually quite right in her assessment. She's saying, my people for over 350 years have been worshiping at Mount Gerizim. We've been worshiping at this false foundation. We've been worshiping at this rival temple. But you all worship in Jerusalem. So where do I worship, Jesus? I'm confused. Because it all boils down to her worship. All of those other issues were side issues to the real thing. She had a thirst. She had a need to understand, where do I worship? So, think about this. You have a temple that has been established out of opposition, rivalry, nepotism, and falsehood, claiming to be a place of worship. How many of those are in the land today? People establishing churches and temples out of opposition to someone else, out of rivalry to someone else, out of nepotism, setting your family up, and out of falsehood, claiming to be a place of worship. The irony of that is that something so faulty would sit on the place that means Mount of Blessing. And this is what the Lord told me. He said, I don't care what you build on the Mount of Blessing. If the Messiah is not in it, it will not be blessed. It will not be blessed. And so think about it. She's living in the city of Sychar, which we know means drunkenness and falsehood. Going to a temple established on falsehood. And so you have falsehoods that is intoxicated by religious nepotism. Is it any wonder why this woman was not going to a temple? So we can't get upset with people when they will not come to a place of falsehood, but they have learned how to meet the Messiah at the well. You cannot get upset with people when they are looking for truth and they cannot find it anywhere. So the Samaritans established this rival worship center that has now been going on for over 360 years. But get this, it's been going strong, but it's been going wrong. Did you know that you can build something so strong and it still be wrong? So there was great controversy over these two worship spots, over these two mega churches. So she seizes the opportunity to get her question answered by Prophet Jesus. And she says, Jesus, I just want to know. There's two rival worship places. You guys worship over here. We worship over there. Where do we go to worship? Where do we really go to worship, Prophet? But then Jesus throws her for a loop because he says, what? Ye worship what ye know not. Verse 21, woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem. Uh-oh, 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 uh-oh. You mean to tell me Jesus said what Jesus said? Jesus said, you will not worship me at Mount Gerizim, and you will not worship me at Jerusalem? Wait a minute, I thought we rebuilt the temple at Jerusalem. What do you mean Jesus said, you will not worship me either at Jerusalem? So Jesus neither affirmed or confirmed neither place. And guess what? When you don't affirm or confirm a religious structure, the religious will hate you in 2016.